morning, everybody. I want to talk today about human progress, and I'll use a couple of examples, including Steve Jobs and Jimmy Page. I read parts of Steve Jobs' autobiography. For those of you who don't know, he is the guy who started Apple Computer. Who then created iPhone, iPod, and so forth. I'm filming this on an iPhone. Everything I produce is made on my MacBook, and I then put it on YouTube and Facebook. So, Steve Jobs, as compared to Bill Gates, who is his contemporary, Steve Jobs was not from an exactly well-to-do sort of environment. He was orphaned when he was a kid. He was adopted by the Jobs family, and he was a rebel growing up. He always had this sense of feeling abandoned. And so when he developed an extremely strong head, a very strong will. And when he went to college, he insisted that he goes to Reed College, which is in Oregon, as opposed to the University of California system, which is where he was from, which would be cheaper. His parents refused, and he said, if I don't go to Reed, I'm not going to college. And so what could they do with that ultimatum? They decided to figure out how to pay for him to go to Reed. Upon going to Reed, he spent a lot of time in calligraphy classes and learning art and stuff. I don't know if that was because he wanted to, he had this idea that he was going to create this Apple computer or not, or if he wanted to use that towards Apple, but it ended up being the education fundamentally that he needed in order to make that. Now, compare that to Bill Gates, who, when he was growing up, was from a well-to-do family from the Seattle area, and then he was around computers and tinkering with them since he was, old enough to wear glasses and be one of those whiz kids. And he went to Harvard, and he dropped out, and he had every advantage working for him, essentially, and the whole thing ended up working. Obviously, he had to work extremely hard around the clock and be, pretty on the goal about everything, but ultimately it worked. Steve Jobs, again, came from a different mold, and the way that they ran their businesses and the type of products they created were substantially and completely different, though they were both in the realm of computers. Bill Gates' entire industry, that what he created, it's something that you could expect that if he did it correctly, it would work. Computers had already been created, and he was providing a better type of software than what was provided at the time to run it. And it worked very computer-like, very rational, focused, organized, and so forth. Steve Jobs, by contrast, he created something that was more idealistic, something more head in the clouds. He wanted to make something beautiful, intuitive. And that is a more difficult thing to produce than something that is by the book, rational, and that makes logical sense. He wanted to create beauty through computers. And for a long time, his computers did not do as well as Bill Gates's did. And I think to this very day, that's still the case, though Mac is getting a lot more popular than it was before, and Microsoft is not quite as strong as it used to be. But the point here is that Steve Jobs had a very strong sense of self, and with that, he was able to create the type of reality he wanted. It may have been because he had that sense of abandonment, but what happened is that whatever he wanted, essentially, he was able to get, because he presented himself as a solution to people's problems. But I take that back. Take the iPod or the iPhone. When he was creating that, people already had smartphones. They were called Blackberries. They weren't as good as the iPhone. They didn't have the glass screen. They weren't touch screen. They had a keyboard at the bottom that was a plastic keyboard and a scroll bar probably, and that was the industry standard. And when he made the iPhone, he said, consumers don't know what they want. I know what they want. With that extremely strong sense of vision, he was able to then create something which radically improved upon the previous thing to the point of being transformative, and it completely swamped BlackBerry and swamped the market. All the Samsungs and so forth, all the Androids, are based on Steve Jobs' initial idea. So, and by the way, the people who make BlackBerry hold like 1% of market share, if even that, at this point. So, when it comes to creating, you need to operate from your own instincts. When Steve Jobs was very young, I'm sure he didn't think that he was going to be creating smartphones and computers. He may have thought that he wanted to create things, and then he started by creating drawing or calligraphy or whatever that is when he was in college, and that ended up leading into, through many other life experiences, from going to India to Germany to working for various other companies, it then turned into his own thing in a way that he could not have predicted. But he followed his instinct from time after time after time after time. And that's how he was able to create something that is now extremely popular and successful. Now, this is not to teach lessons of how to become a rich billionaire, although, of course, following such a thing in some instances could lead you to become like Steve Jobs. This is to say that when one follows their deepest instincts and has a strong sense of will about it, they're able to break from the mold of how everything currently operates and create something new. In my second Amazing People interview with Dr. Garagoslu, he said that 0 to 1, which is a book by Peter Thiel, 0 to 1 is the essence of America and American production, in the sense that we create things. It's the invention. The invention happens here. Think Thomas Edison. Think Steve Jobs. Think Henry Ford. Though he didn't take Henry Ford out because he actually just built upon, I think, a German idea. But 1 to 1,000 is China. China's job is to mass produce something that's already been created. But who holds the intellectual property rights? It's the person in America. Who has the pride of having actually created it, and who went through the work, the many, many trials and errors of producing something? The person who went from 0 to 1, who in this example is the person in America. So when you can be at the leading edge of invention and industry, that's when you can make the society around you better. Now, everybody can't do that. There need to be people who work at Steve Jobs' company, at Bill Gates' company, and they're in service of a new product. That's one of the cool things about Silicon Valley, why a lot of people, maybe of my generation, probably a little earlier generation, have flocked to Silicon Valley, because they not only do they think they're going to get paid well and work at a in a nice environment with ping pong tables and nice perks, probably free massages and haircuts and free vegan food, but also that they think that they are working on something that is actually revolutionary to not just the company they're working at or the country they're in, but within the world in total. And how did any of these companies start? Anybody who starts a company takes a risk, and as any salesperson or any person who knows anything about business would tell you, more than 90% of people fail. And then they may end up working for someone like Steve Jobs, or they may do something else. Who knows? But for the people who are able to succeed, who are able to bring their instincts and ingenuity and genius into the world in the most forthright and amazing way, can then find other people to structure the business, and then now it's a business that produces something that no one ever knew about, yet we all get to benefit from it. So, another person I want to talk about is Jimmy Page. So Jimmy Page is the guitarist of Led Zeppelin, and he was already a famous guitarist at the age of 24, because he was part of this band called the Yardbirds, which also had Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck, two other great guitarists, and they disbanded. And he decided he wasn't done making music, so he started this supergroup, which didn't have a name at the time, and he auditioned people from all over London or all over England, and he found the best vocalist he could find, Robert Plant, who also looked the part, giant, large mane of hair, and then John Bonham, this amazing drummer, and then another guy named John Paul Jones to be the bassist. And as far as Keith Richards says when he thinks Led Zeppelin, which is what that band ended up becoming, when he thinks Led Zeppelin, he just thinks Jimmy Page, which is a bit unfair, actually, because the other people did contribute quite a bit, and Jimmy Page on his own wouldn't have been able to produce that. But I think Jimmy Page used those people as vehicles to help his music come out into the world. So Zeppelin was engineered from the beginning, and it turned out to be an absolute smashing hit. He said that in the 70s they could not supply the demand for concerts. All their concerts sold out, and every place there weren't enough days of the year that they could play that people wouldn't keep on coming. So this is another person who, like Steve Jobs, had a talent and a skill, and was unafraid of bringing that out into the world in the most big way possible. Of course, he needed support from John Paul Jones, who's the bassist, who, according to the vocalist, that guy produced the least of the band, but nonetheless, he was in a support role, and he did the support role well. So the overall point here is that if Jimmy Page tried to be Steve Jobs, he would have failed. If Steve Jobs tried to be Jimmy Page, he would have failed. And they both produced what they produced in a similar time frame in the 70s and 80s. So anyway, the point is, follow those instincts. You don't know where it's going to lead you. It could just lead you to superstardom, or it could lead you to produce something of immense value for the people around you. And as you're doing it, have faith in yourself. Have faith that those instincts are correct. And the more nervous they make you, the more it upsets the mold of your current life, probably the better those instincts are. When you're in a position of business like Steve Jobs, you will be faced with that fear on a very regular basis, because you always need to challenge your current way of thinking in order to grow into the new business environment of next week. You can't stay last week or the week before. So you're forced to do that. For most people who have pretty comfortable lives, it's very easy to just stay comfortable and also keep your mentalities the same. But so much as you do that, you remain stagnant. You feel like your soul has not been expressed. And that's the most amazing thing about Jimmy Page and Steve Jobs. They used their outlets to express their soul. And that is what gave it power and life that other people weren't able to have. And it elicits the same thing within the people who engage with it. I'm a huge Led Zeppelin fan, and I'm a Big Apple fan as well. So my life has been made better for the risk that they took and the ingenuity that they had to produce what they did. Now, even if you can't end up producing something of the same quality of Jimmy Page or Steve Jobs, it could be the very fact of honoring those instincts for your own self. If you look at yourself as a creation, forget the fact that they made music and computers that sold and made money and so forth. That's not a holistic way to look at it. Those are actually inanimate objects, which they breathe life into, but nonetheless, at the end of the day, it's music and it's computers. If you look at yourself as a creation and work to make that as good as Jimmy Page made his guitar work and the total music work, same thing as Steve Jobs, I think you've made an amazing creation, and a creation that has life within it, human life, unlike those inanimate objects. So, I hope this helps, and I by the way, how I do it, I work on, I'm playing guitar right now. That's the C chord. That's the G chord. That's the E chord, and I can do a couple of others too. And the way that it's produced is cleaner than it used to be. My friend Alex has taught me all the guitar that I know, or almost all the guitar, and I was awful in the beginning. I was really bad, but I think so is everybody, almost everybody at least. But I've worked at it because I have faith that I can actually become good, even though my fingers are not quite so thin, which helps. It helps if you have thin fingers. I think I can still be pretty good, and I've actually started to enjoy it. You know, when I was growing up, we had a guitar in our house a long time ago, and I remember just fiddling with it, and I developed a liking for guitars. And then in 2012, I bought this guitar for $80 on Amazon, and I had it, and I played it, and I had very little interest in it, honestly. But I had enough interest to buy it, to actually spend money on it. And in 2014, Alex taught me some guitar, and now, in 2018, he's taught me some more, and it's all building up. Who knows where these instincts might lead? I don't know. Steve Jobs took drawing classes. I'm doing this, and again, it's not necessarily just about the outside, but if I can make myself a good guitar player, I think that'll be helpful. But in addition to guitar, which is just one aspect, which is new for me, I do a lot of exercise, I do yoga, I do meditation from time to time. I'm not disciplined about that. But these are what I do in order to make my creation of myself as best as I can be. I'm on an exercise break right now because this whole year was very arduous. 2018 was the hardest year of my life. My father died on March 21st. And the months leading up to that were very difficult. And then, I've worked harder at tennis, and I started a band, and I've made many videos, filmed a few amazing peoples, making speeches. I've been doing a lot, and at this point, I'm just tired. And I'm gonna take the month off of tennis at least. Exercise I might get into next week or so, but nonetheless, the consistent trajectory is upwards. And that's why I have faith. That's why I have faith that I can take a break and that'll be okay. Because I know the strength and muscle and grit that I've been developing over the course of, my whole life really, but especially this year. And it's come at the price of a lot of pain. But I call it the good type of pain, The good type of pain that is good. And it really hurts when you're doing it. It's like extreme pain almost, but you need to do it, and that the goal on the other side of it, the personal development you'll get is worth it, and that the thing you're actually able to produce, whether it's guitar, tennis, whatever, is going to be better. So another thing, every person's function is different, Dr. Atala, who was my fourth or fifth guest on Amazing People, he said that he worked on the Human Genome Project, and I jokingly texted him, I'm going to work on the Human Genome Project one day. He texted back. That was the most fun I've had, most fun thing I've ever worked on. No, he must have learned the Human Genome Project, or even earlier, maybe when he was in 5th grade, that every person is different. Your fingerprints are different, your physical composition is different. And though certain rules apply to everybody, like you need to exercise, you need to eat healthily, and things like that, the specific ways it takes place for different people is different. In Rafael Nadal's autobiography, which he wrote when he was like 23, he's a tennis player, pro tennis player. He wrote that Roger Federer, who's another pro, who's considered to be the greatest of all time by many, including myself, Roger Federer does not need to work as hard as Rafael Nadal does, or any other tennis player does, because there's something special in his DNA. And so Roger Federer has that, and so he has that, and so he lives like that. He works as much as he needs to, whereas Nadal and other people who work more. That's one benefit Federer has. One benefit he does not have is that maybe that extreme work that Nadal's need to put in, like extreme, has given him a hair more mental fortitude than Federer has, because Nadal will not break down on the tennis court. He'll never get angry. He'll hardly ever look like his mind is lost. He'll never play awfully. And none of those are things you can say about Federer, though those occasions are rare. They're rare. But Federer has gotten angry. He has smashed tennis rackets. He has played truly horrendously, like in the Cincinnati final this year playing against Djokovic. He'd return a serve and go in the bottom of the net. He'd return another serve and go in the bottom of the net. Nadal would never do that. If he's playing bad, he'll probably just hit a weak shot. He won't hit it in the bottom of the net. So it's also Roger Federer's not his destiny to win 10 or 11 or 12 French Opens like Nadal has. Nadal has won that many French Opens. Federer's won one. And he's probably going to stay at one until he retires. So we're all different. We're all different. Jimmy Page, Federer, Jobs, Nadal, they couldn't fill each other's shoes. And I'm size 11. If I try to wear a size 12, it wouldn't, or size 10, it wouldn't fit very well. The most I could go is 11 and a half or 10 and a half probably. And I think that it's that initial bending when you start to change in a way that's not helpful, in a way that comes from not the right place, in a way that comes out of fear. That's when you lose everything. Because shoe size, physically, I would not be able to go beyond those ranges. But mentally, psychologically, personally, people start changing in a way that's not good, figuratively like 10 and a half or 11 and a half, then they go to 13 or 7, and it's completely wrong, yet they don't realize they're in the wrong place until they completely trip up, fall on their face, and realize they need to go back to the shoes that they're supposed to be in.